It began as just another storm forming in the Atlantic, but within days it would unleash chaos that no one imagined possible. A city known for its music, culture, and spirit was brought to its knees, not only by the fury of nature, but by failures buried deep within its very defenses. What if the tragedy wasn't only about the hurricane itself, but about mistakes that had been years in the making? Today, we revisit one of the darkest chapters in American history. The day an engineering failure turned a natural disaster into a catastrophe that shocked the world. Monday, August 29, 2005. On this day, the most notorious hurricane in U.S. history slammed into the Louisiana-Mississippi border. Hurricane Katrina struck the Gulf Coast with sustained winds of 125 miles per hour and a storm surge reaching 30 feet high. In New Orleans, a city sitting below sea level, the extensive flood defenses were under extreme stress. The levee system, built along canals and waterways to protect neighborhoods from rising waters, struggled against the billions of gallons of seawater Katrina pushed inland. By early morning, the city's greatest nightmare became reality when the levee along the 17th Street Canal, the primary barrier shielding the Lakeview district, suddenly gave way. Like falling dominoes, other levees soon collapsed, releasing torrents of water that consumed New Orleans and surrounding parishes. The disaster that followed became one of the deadliest and most expensive natural catastrophes in American history, killing over 1,800 people and causing $125 billion in damages. Determining exactly how New Orleans' defenses failed became a matter of national urgency. What investigators discovered stunned the country. Years of mismanagement, flawed judgment, and bureaucratic red tape had produced a catastrophic engineering failure, making Katrina a storm seared into history. To understand why it went so wrong, we need to examine several key points: what levees are, the geography of New Orleans, the city's flood control measures, and finally, Hurricane Katrina itself. Let's begin with levees. A levee is a relatively basic flood barrier. These man-made embankments, usually made from earth or reinforced concrete, keep rivers, canals, or lakes from spilling into developed areas. Though simple in appearance, their interaction with water dynamics is complex. Levees must resist hydrostatic and hydrodynamic pressure through the strength of the soil they rest upon. They are constructed with wide foundations for two reasons. First, hydrostatic pressure increases with depth. The deeper the water, the greater the force. Anyone who has dived deep into a pool has felt this growing pressure firsthand. Second, a broad base distributes the stress over more ground, improving the structure's ability to withstand these forces. Now that levees are clear, let's consider New Orleans' setting. The city is in a uniquely vulnerable position, surrounded by water. When French colonists founded New Orleans in the early 1700s, they built on the higher natural levees along the Mississippi River. Development stayed close to these ridges until the Flood Control Act of 1965 funded protective works along Lake Pontchartrain. This new infrastructure allowed the city to expand into low-lying areas that had once been wetlands and floodplains. By 2005, New Orleans and nearby parishes were laced with waterways. The 17th Street Canal, London Avenue Canal, the Industrial Canal, the Intracoastal Waterway, the Mississippi River, and Lake Pontchartrain itself. Protecting the city meant relying on a patchwork system designed mainly by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. As newer levees were added, older ones were modified. Many required flood walls to be added on top, since the taller a levee is, the wider its base must be. With houses and streets pressed against them, expanding outward wasn't possible, so vertical concrete walls were incorporated into existing embankments in an eye-wall style. Alongside this, nearly 100 pumping stations were spread across the city to remove rain and seepage. Yet experts knew that the right storm hitting in the right place could overwhelm all of these measures. On Tuesday, August 23, 2005, a tropical depression formed near the Bahamas. Within a day, the National Hurricane Center upgraded it to Tropical Storm Katrina, the 11th named storm of that season. By Thursday, August 25th, Katrina had strengthened into a Category 1 hurricane as it struck southeast Florida. That first landfall was mild, weakening the storm slightly. But upon entering the Gulf of Mexico, Katrina drew strength from unusually warm waters. Over the course of Saturday night into Sunday morning, the system intensified explosively, leaping from Category 3 to Category 5 in just 9 hours. Forecast models placed its next landfall in southeast Louisiana. Declaring a federal emergency, officials urged residents to evacuate. Thousands fled, while those unable to leave sought refuge in the Superdome or remained at home. On Sunday evening, August 28th, New Orleans waited anxiously. Katrina loomed just offshore. Even before landfall, the storm surge overwhelmed unprotected parts of the Mississippi Delta. Inside the city, levees were already straining under the massive inflows of water. By 5 a.m. Monday, cracks in the defenses were appearing. The first breach occurred on the east side of the Industrial Canal, flooding the lower Ninth Ward. At 6 a.m., Katrina officially struck land as a Category 3 hurricane, blasting the coast with 125-mile-per-hour winds. Its eye wall pushed a 30-foot surge into Mississippi, while Louisiana saw levels of up to 16 feet. But even at these slightly lower levels near New Orleans, the storm exposed a deadly flaw. Around 6:30 a.m., the 17th Street Canal's eastern levee collapsed, sending water surging into the Lakeview neighborhood. Within half an hour, the London Avenue Canal failed on both sides. Across New Orleans, water rose frighteningly fast. In many places, a foot every 10 minutes. Neighborhoods near the breaches were instantly submerged, their single-story homes engulfed by walls of water. Pump stations across the city were quickly disabled, many inundated before they could operate. Even as the storm passed, gaping breaches remained. How could the system fail so thoroughly? The answer lay in engineering missteps. The city's levees were earthen structures built atop layers of marsh and clay. Such soft foundations are prone to sliding under extreme hydraulic pressure. Engineers typically counter this by ensuring the soil's resistance exceeds the forces at play, which requires precise measurements of soil strength. Soil samples were indeed collected and tested, but engineers misread the results, basing designs on the wrong strength profile, essentially the opposite of what was needed. To make matters worse, they adopted a very low safety margin. To illustrate, an elevator rated for 1,000 pounds with a safety factor of 2 can actually carry 2,000 pounds before failing. The Corps used a safety factor of only 1.3 for New Orleans levees, barely acceptable for ordinary structures, let alone life-critical flood defenses. Other oversights worsened the situation. At the 17th Street Canal, erosion along the waterside carved a gap that reduced the soil's effective strength, further weakening the barrier. At the London Avenue Canal, sand, far less stable than clay, lay beneath the marsh. As water levels rose, pressure forced water into this sand layer, creating a path of least resistance. Erosion spread underneath until the levee collapsed entirely. Meanwhile, at the Industrial Canal, waves topped the levee. As water poured over, it eroded the dry side, steadily stripping away material until another failure occurred. Beyond these structural flaws, the city's very layout magnified the disaster. Much of its housing sits in high-risk flood zones. In its report, the American Society of Civil Engineers questioned whether residents should even be allowed to live in such areas. Katrina represented the nightmare scenario. Yet, even years later, people returned to rebuild in the same vulnerable neighborhoods. The questions linger. What if the levees had been built correctly? What if the pumps had held? What if evacuation had been more effective? Katrina didn't just devastate a region. It revealed how fragile America's flood control systems could be when engineering, oversight, and accountability fall short. The storm wasn't only one of the nation's deadliest natural disasters, but also one of its most tragic engineering failures. Hurricane Katrina exposed more than the limits of levees. It exposed the limits of human oversight, planning, and responsibility. Thousands lost everything, not only because of a storm, but because of errors buried deep within the very systems meant to protect them. And yet, nearly 2 decades later, people continue to rebuild in the same flood-prone neighborhoods, still trusting the same defenses. So we're left with haunting questions. Have we truly learned from Katrina? Or are we waiting for history to repeat itself? What do you think? Was this disaster unavoidable? Or was it a failure we should have seen coming? Thank you for watching today's episode on Empire History Central. Please like, subscribe, and share.